Okay, so good morning again, and welcome to this briefing on CITES CoP19. For those of you here and online, thank you very much for being with us. I know you have to take time from your busy schedules to be able to join us, and it is probably comes at no surprise to you that we are also very busy in the Secretariat with the final preparations for COP19 in Panama City that will take place between the 14th of November and the 25th of November. We have only almost, I think now we're beyond less than 4 weeks to go before we start. And yes, so we are very busy preparing for the meeting with it. We expect about 2,000 delegates to be there from 160 parties and more than 200 observer organizations. And I imagine that number will rise a little bit because I don't think we're taking into account also some local presence in the conference. We're very busy, but we're also very optimistic. Imagine after all this time that we have been in basically lockdown and not really traveling, not being able to have face-to-face meetings. It's very exciting for us to be able to meet with our Conference of the Parties physically in Panama City and for them to take decisions that are urgent about conservation of wildlife and regulating the trade and the international trade in wildlife. Also, as you know, there's many Conference of the Parties for several COPs. We just almost decided all of us to have it at the same time. We'll be having first, as you know, the UNFCCC will be meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Then Ramsar Convention on Wetlands will be meeting here in Geneva. Then we will have our CITES COP, and then after that we will have the CBD COP, the Convention on Biological Diversity, meeting in Montreal in December. And this is a very important meeting as well, because there will be the final negotiations on the global biodiversity framework of the CBD. So, and we're all really awaiting that with bated breath, as we feel that definitely all biodiversity conventions, related conventions, should be contributing to the achievement of the goals in the global biodiversity framework, as well as many other multilateral environmental agreements like the climate change one, like chemicals agreements. So we're all looking forward to play our roles in ensuring that we can deal with the triple planetary crisis that we are confronting now of biodiversity loss, pollution, and climate change. Can I introduce then my colleagues, the speakers, who will be giving you a little bit more background on the various issues that we will be touching upon at the COP. Myself, Yvonne Higuero, I'm the Secretary General of CITES. I should have done that from the very beginning. Sorry about that. And then I have with me my colleagues, Tia Carroll, who is the officer in charge of the Governing Bodies Unit. We have with us David Morgan, who is the chief of our scientific unit. Benyansi van Rensburg, you might want to lift your hand so you can see, who is the chief of the enforcement unit. To my left, I have Mr. Juan Carlos Vasquez, who is the chief of the legal unit. And I have Sophie Flensburg, who has been officer in charge of the outreach and projects unit in the absence of our colleague, Haruko Kuso, who is here with us also today, who has just come back from being organizing a very successful Stockholm Plus 50 conference, where she was based in New York for a little while. So Sophie will be presenting, but I don't want you to think that you'll be missing out on Haruko, who will also be with us in Panama City at the COP. So on the agenda, we have quite a few issues that my colleagues here will be presenting. I'll give a short overview. We will also be discussing, of course, the strategic vision of the COP and generally on implementation matters. Then we will have a discussion which is going to be something that a lot of people pay attention to, which are the changes to the CITES appendices, the enforcement matters, the legal matters, and then capacity building and outreach, where we will finally have a little discussion about the budget of the Secretariat and the program of work, and then some time for you to ask questions if you have any additional inquiries about what the COP is about. So without further ado, and I need to change my glasses because I cannot see that well far. Just a little bit of background about CITES. You can go ahead and Many of you know who are here, missions in Geneva, as we are located here, the Secretariat in Geneva. Many of you know about about CITES, about the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. But I'll give you a little bit of background just in case some of you are new. And as you may know, this is an international treaty between governments signed. It's a legally binding international agreement signed by 183 parties plus one regional organization. And the ultimate aim of CITES is to regulate international trade of wild animals and plants so it does not threaten their survival in the wild. We now are preparing also not only for our COP19, but preparing for the 50th birthday of CITES next year. It was signed in 1973, so next year we are turning 50, and we are very excited about this. And as I said, one of the interesting aspects, very interesting aspects of CITES, which is this listing of species in the appendices. We have 3 appendices. Appendix 1, which is not allowing any commercial trade of species, these wild species that are on Appendix 1. And we have Appendix 2, which does allow international trade in species, but it has to be very strictly regulated with a permitting system. And that system is put in place by all parties, both importing and exporting parties have this permitting system in place. And then Appendix 3, which is an appendix where if there are concerns, possible concerns about a species that may be being traded, concerns that it may be being traded internationally too much, or they're not sure what is causing some decrease in populations of these species, a party may ask that this species be added to Appendix 3 so we can keep an eye on it. And maybe if there is evidence later that it is being overly or traded too much that it might affect the survival in the wild, then it can be possibly listed in the other appendices. The next one. So as I said, we have this framework and all this common procedures about regulation implemented by these 140 parties, almost universal at the global level, and they're monitoring this international trade in listed species. So we were supposed to have this conference of the parties earlier this year because we hold it every 2 to 3 years. The last one we had was here in Geneva, the COP18 in August of 2019. So we were reaching the limit of having the COP this year, concerned about the pandemic as well. But thankfully, situation has become a lot better. And international travel has been, most countries have international travel, so we will be having, as I said, quite a few participants, more than 2,000 in the meeting, where they will be reviewing the amendments to the appendices, where there will be these proposals. And again, David Morgan will be explaining a bit more about that. Amendments to either downlist or uplist species, or for the first time, put species on these appendices. We will always be discussing resolutions at these COP meetings. Some resolutions that already exist, there may be proposals to amend these resolutions, but there will also be proposals for new resolutions. And one important resolution that we have, and why it's very important that we hold this COP in 2022, is because our budget runs through the 3-year period from 2020 to 2022. So we will need a new resolution on the new budget from 2023 to 2025. And then, of course, a myriad of decisions. And I have here the numbers of how many decisions are in front of us right now. We have, the agenda has more than 90 items and 127 working documents relating to the implementation and compliance and enforcement that will be discussed at the meeting. And this has to do with the decisions also that I was just mentioning. So we have more than 3,300 pages to be studied in preparation for the COP. So you can imagine not only the work for the Secretariat, but the work for the parties who have to prepare themselves for these discussions. Amongst those different things that we will be discussing is, of course, the role of Indigenous people and communities in the convention. We will have youth delegates being involved in the COP, which very much CITES is about youth and about the future generations, since we are making sure that these species are surviving in the wild for future generations. And another important point is that we will be having, that we are able to raise money, raise funds, and my colleague Sophie will talk a little bit about that, of our sponsored delegates who will be attending the meeting. And we have about 93 of them, parties being represented at the meeting through this finance that we were able to raise with the parties and others of $519,364. So again, this is a very strategic COP to be able to set in motion all of the work that we are doing to really make a contribution to halting the loss of biodiversity, to conserving wildlife, to regulating the trade in wildlife, and to ensure that these species survive in the wild, and that still economies who depend on these species, indigenous people and local communities who depend on these species can continue to have their livelihoods, can continue to contribute to the economy, can contribute to jobs in the different economies of the parties. So we feel that having this COP, having CITES is a very big contribution to living with nature, in harmony with nature, and ensuring that we don't suffer any more biodiversity loss, especially with the concerns that we have and in the reports that you have been seeing just recently and also in the past year or so, showing how many species are at the brink of extinction and could possibly be lost for various reasons, but also because of overexploitation, and this is what we are controlling under CITES. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on to my colleague Tia Carroll, who is going to take up, as you know, we're welcoming you to Panama, and who will discuss a little bit about these arrangements and also the strategic vision of the convention and other implementation matters. Tia?
Thank you, Thank you, Secretary General, and good morning, Excellencies, representatives of government, and members of civil society. Before I provide a brief overview of the strategic vision and documents relating to cooperation, as well as a few items on elephants to be discussed at the upcoming Conference of Parties, I would like to share information about links to important documents that is available on the CITES website. Other than the agenda that specifies the items to be discussed, the working program is important as it provides an indication of when items will be discussed. The working program also indicates whether an item will be discussed in Committee 1, the committee that considers proposals and scientific matters, or Committee 2, the committee that considers working documents on implementation, interpretation, compliance, and enforcement items. It should be noted that all recommendations, of course, made in Committee 1 and 2 will be presented to plenary for final adoption. A daily schedule for the COP is also available on the CITES website, and this includes possible venues and times for working groups that may be established, as well as the schedule of side events that will be taking place during the COP. This daily schedule will be updated on a regular basis to inform participants about what is happening next. The proposals to be considered by the Conference of Parties, as well as the Secretariat's assessment of the proposals, are available on the CITES website, and the relevant links are provided in the presentation that will be shared. Please note that a number of additional documents will be added to the website, and we'd like to encourage members and participants to regularly check the CITES website for updates in this regard. In addition to the information on the CITES website, the host country also launched a website that includes information relating to the national parks and natural treasures of Panama, as well as important information relating to transport, medical facilities, and other logistical information. The information that I refer to can be accessed from the meeting page on the CITES website, as well as the dedicated CITES CoP19 webpage that we created. A quick overview of the 2 weeks that is coming up. Based on the working program, the meeting will start in plenary on the 14th of November, and it will end in plenary on the 24th and 25th of November, where the recommendations from Committee 1 and 2 will be considered for adoption. The majority of time, however, will be spent in Committee 1 and 2, where the delegates and participants will discuss the various working documents and proposals. A standing committee meeting will also take place on the 13th of November, And on the last day of the COP, after the meeting has come to a close, there will be a short standing committee to discuss business going forward. With regard to the CITES strategic vision, it was adopted by the 18th meeting of the Conference of Parties and outlines the Convention's direction for the period 2021 to 2030 in fulfillment of its mandate. The vision agreed by CITES parties is that by 2030, all international trade in wild fauna and flora is legal and sustainable, consistent with the long-term conservation of species, and thereby contributing to halting biodiversity loss, to ensuring its sustainable use, and to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The Standing Committee developed indicators to monitor whether parties are achieving the objectives agreed in the strategic vision, and the Secretariat prepared an addendum to the document that includes important baseline information in this regard. The COP will also consider a decision to map the CITES strategic vision against the post-20 framework once adopted. The strategic vision is designed to, inter alia, improve the relationship with complementary international efforts to achieve conservation and sustainable development, including through collaboration with others. The next item on cooperation with other biodiversity-related conventions and organizations is therefore closely linked to the strategic vision. The importance of collaboration, cooperation, and partnerships to effectively and efficiently implement the convention while raising its profile and benefiting efforts undertaken in other fora is discussed in document COP19 Doc 17.1. The COP will consider, among others, the need to prepare a partnership strategy for the parties, the permanent committees, and the Secretariat to enhance the implementation of the convention, as well as decisions to encourage parties to strengthen synergies among biodiversity-related MEAs at the national level, and to improve coordination and cooperation. The cooperation of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services is another strategic matter to be discussed. Draft decisions relating to the proposed review of the recently launched thematic assessment on of the sustainable use of wild species by the Scientific Advisory Committees and the Standing Committee will be considered. There are several documents relating to elephants to be considered by the Conference of the Parties. The outcomes of the review of the CITES program, or the Elephant Trade Information System that monitors the movement of illegal ivory across the globe. That includes amendments to the annex to the resolution that sets out operational matters relating to the program, as well as prioritized recommendations coming out of the review. A document on the operational and financial sustainability of the MIC and CITES programs will be discussed, including the implementation of proposed approaches to address the sustainability of the programs. The Standing Committee also reports to the COP on the implementation of resolution on trade in elephant specimens. The document includes 5 parts, and I'll briefly refer to them. Part 1 addressed the closure of domestic ivory markets. That includes the renewal of decisions relating to reporting by parties that have not closed their domestic markets for commercial trade in raw and worked ivory. The same subject matter is also addressed in document 66.3. That includes a draft decision directed at the Secretariat to engage the MIC and CITES Technical Advisory Group and Traffic to carry out an analysis of ivory seizures connected to each party with a legal domestic market for commercial trade in ivory. Part 2 addresses trade in mammoth ivory, including a decision directed to the Secretariat to consider available information on and research studies relating to potential contribution of mammoth ivory to illegal trade in ivory and elephant poaching. Part 3 discussed trade in Asian elephants and decisions directed at Asian elephant range states involved in the trade in Asian elephants and their parts and derivatives. The Part 4 covers stocks and stockpiles of elephant ivory. The Standing Committee adopted practical guidance on ivory stockpile management, as well as a review of elephant destruction methods during the intersessional period, and a decision is proposed to share information on the development of new techniques and technologies. It furthermore proposes that the COP adopts revised decisions relating to the publication of aggregated data relating to stockpile inventories on the CITES website, as well as the identification of parties that have not provided information on stockpiles or are not keeping stocks secure. The last part relates to progress on the implementation of the National Ivory Action Plan process, and document 66.7 propose a review of the National Ivory Action Plan process. Two documents relate to ivory stockpiles. The first document proposes, among others, the use of a specific form to report on stockpiles, and the second document proposes the establishment of a fund that can be accessed by range states upon non-commercial disposal of ivory stockpiles. The proponents indicate that the funding mechanism could be based on the concept of the African Elephant Fund, but on a much larger scale and accessible to all elephant range states and not only African elephant range states. The report on the monitoring of illegal killing of elephants, or MIKE, will be considered. The MIKE network in Africa and Asia has expanded through addition of sites in Vietnam and the expansion of the site in Bangladesh, as well as the addition of a site in Zimbabwe, bringing the total number of sites to 99. The 2021 PIKE estimate for Africa is higher than the 2020 estimate, while it's within the confidence limits of the 2020 estimate. The PIKE trend in the last 5 years for Asia has remained relatively flat, with an average value of 0.35. The covariate analysis conducted for Africa shows that there was strong evidence that the illegal killing of elephants tend to be lower in countries where there was strong evidence that, in countries of better governance quality, at sites of higher law enforcement capacity, and at sites where adjacent households are wealthier and healthier. With regard to the CITES report, the assessment of the results of the cluster analysis and the categorization of parties based on the assessment is set out in document 66.6 as annex. Parties are categorized based on the extent to which they are affected by illegal trade in ivory in category A, B, and C. The Secretariat will develop recommendations for consideration by the 75th meeting of the Standing Committee in line with the guidelines to the National Ivory Action Plan process and provide an oral update at the COP. With regard to trade in live African elephants, two documents has been submitted for consideration by the COP. One proposes an amendment to the resolution on trade in elephant specimens to specify, among others, that trade in live African elephants taken from the wild should be limited to in situ conservation programs or secure areas in the wild within the species' natural and historical range in Africa, while the other document proposes a stepwise process to consider the implications of changes to the resolutions, including a proposed dialogue meeting. Thank you, Secretary General.
Thank you very much, Tia, for that very good overview of the documents and decisions that are set for the parties to take regarding strategic vision of CITES and the cooperation with other agreements, etc. Thanks very much for all that. And I also just wanted to highlight that Tia has also been, and her team have been the ones organizing and preparing all the logistics, working with the government of Panama, to whom we are very grateful for hosting the COP this year, this period. And congratulations to Tia and the team for all the work that they have done. Now I pass on to David Morgan, who I also congratulate him and his team for all the hard work to go through all of these 52 proposals. You may have seen online already that we had first the provisional assessment by the Secretariat, and now we have the final assessment available online for those of you who are interested in downloading that and taking a look at what the comments of the Secretariat are. But again, hard work, very hard work to do all of this, and thanks, David, for being with us to explain to the missions what we have been doing on those proposals and other decisions that are related to science. Thank you.
Start again. I'm copying you. It's a pleasure to be with you again today as we approach the 19th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. I'm going to give you a few brief highlights about some of the items which are coming up with a scientific flavor. Won't have time to go into a lot of detail. The first item, and probably the principal item of a scientific nature, is the proposals to amend the appendices. As the Secretary-General explained, we've got 3 appendices with different levels of protection afforded to different species, depending on their conservation needs. And at every meeting of the conference, parties can put forward proposals to adjust the level of protection for the species. So they can add a species to the appendices, that's to say, bring a species under CITES control. They can adjust the level of protection which is afforded to a species within the appendices so that controls are tightened or controls on international trade are tightened or loosened. Or indeed, if circumstances dictate, they can delete a species from the appendices so its trade is no longer regulated under the convention. So at this upcoming meeting of the conference, we have 52 proposals which were submitted on time with a full justification statement for them. We've got 49 party proponents. That's parties who've submitted these proposals, and 49 is over a quarter of our parties. So quite a lot of work has gone on despite the COVID pandemic. It shows people have been working behind the scenes, even from home, and we've got quite a lot on our agenda. Of those 52 proposals, 39 are to increase protection for the species, 12 are to decrease it, and 1 is a technical proposal which you might describe as neutral. It's a fairly crude measure, but I think that's an indication of the way that biodiversity is going around the world. CITES attention is needed more than ever. The regulation of trade in wildlife internationally is still a threat to species, and more species need to be protected than are being deprotected, unfortunately. This time around, we've got a wide variety of species proposed. We've got lots of tree species for the timber trade. We've got lots of turtles, freshwater turtles, used a lot in the pet trade and for food in various parts of the world. We've got proposals on rhinoceros to loosen the trade in some rhinoceroses. Their rhinoceroses have been increasing in numbers in recent years, and there's a move to try and allow more trade in live specimens in particular. We've got a proposal for hippopotamus that should attract a lot of attention, I'm sure. And finally, and no conference of the parties is complete without a discussion on elephants, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I should also have mentioned that there's quite a few proposals for sharks at this upcoming conference, and I'll be addressing that a little bit later as well. So I thought I would just pick out a few examples of the proposals that are made, just to give you a flavor of the sort of thing, the arguments that are being put forward. And first of all, the traditional African elephant proposal. I can't remember the last time there wasn't a proposal for African elephants at a conference of the parties. And at this COP, we have a similar menu that we've seen at previous meetings. Now, there are about 500,000 elephants left in the wild in Africa. Most of them are in the southern part of Africa. And some of the countries in the south of Africa want to be rewarded for looking after their elephants and increasing their numbers by being able to trade in the products that come from elephants, and in particular, of course, for ivory. And so at this conference of the parties, Zimbabwe is putting forward a proposal to loosen the controls on trade in African elephant ivory in order to be able to benefit from the use of this resource and to reinvest that money in the conservation of elephants. On the other side of the equation, we have a second proposal from Burkina Faso, Equatorial Guinea, Mali, and Senegal. Between them, they don't have many elephants in their country, and they're concerned that if trade in ivory was reopened, it would have a negative impact on the very small number of elephants they have remaining in their country. So you have this tension between the different parties within Africa, and different proposals are made going in opposite directions, if you will. And we look forward to seeing how the debate goes this time. The opinions change slowly on this matter, so I think we're in for a tense debate about African elephants at the 19th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Now, the next species I wanted to talk about is completely different. This is a sea cucumber, which is a tropical invertebrate found in tropical marine waters around the globe. We've already got 4 species listed on the CITES appendices. It's used as a food, particularly in Asia, when it's gutted and dried. It's called bêche de mer when it's prepared for eating. These species, as you can probably guess by looking at them, are not desperately turbo, so they're easily harvested, and indeed they're easily over-harvested because they can be easily collected. So there is a concern about the use of them. We've got a proposal this time around for the listing of 3 species under CITES that are not presently regulated under the convention. 3 species which are found quite widely, but are under diffuse pressure from overfishing in various parts of the world. This is a sort of reference point for other marine species which are proposed for listing, in particular sharks. We've got 3 proposals to include sharks, certain species of sharks under the convention. We've already got quite a lot of sharks already listed on the appendices, but a further 100 species are proposed for trade regulation. Now, first of all, we have the biological information about these species. They're often rather poorly known in the marine domain because there's not as much research goes on as there is for elephants. But also in this sector, there are multiple actors involved in the management of these resources. There are regional fisheries management organizations, the FAO in Rome. So there's also a need to get the mixture right in terms of the management so that these resources can be secured for future generations. So that's a little example of some of the marine species which we have coming up for discussion at the conference. The next major group are tree species. Timber species in particular, used for timber around the world, both for construction, tools, implements, joinery, furniture in particular, flooring. Many of the most sought after timber species are very attractive wood, useful for furniture, widely used around the world. And it's a very large industry, extremely important industry economically. So there's a lot at stake when we discuss species proposals relating to tree species in CITES. What we've seen in recent years is many more of the countries of origin where these trees are growing are turning to CITES to regulate the trade. First of all, this helps them to manage the resources sustainably, but it also helps them to crack down on illegal trade. And of course, where there's big money, you get criminal elements, and CITES listing is obviously seen by many countries of origin as a useful tool to regulate the trade. This time around, we have 5 proposals to include new species within the framework of the convention. They cover around 150 species of precious wood. So often difficult to have a good grasp of the science here because many of these species are poorly known. They're particularly poorly known to scientists and to local authorities. Of course, they're well known to people in the timber industry because they're a valuable resource. So should be an interesting discussion. As I say, this is an increasing trend. We get more and more more and more tree species being listed on the appendices. And this shows the changing value of CITES over time. And lastly, the last species I wanted to feature on the proposal to amend the appendices is this one, the Aleutian cackling goose. Now, this is a different story. This species was placed on Appendix 1, so its international trade was prohibited many years ago. It had been overhunted and overexploited, also had a problem with introduced foxes, which were predating the young of these birds when they nest on the ground. Their eggs and young were being eaten by foxes. It was put on CITES Appendix 1. Now, since then, the range states for this species, the countries where it occurs, the United States, Russian Federation, and Japan in particular, have put in place a number of measures to improve the status of the species. They've reintroduced it, they've controlled the foxes, they've limited the harvest, and the result is today, whereas we had a couple of hundred specimens left in the 1960s, today we have 162,000. So something to celebrate, positive news. And as a result, there's a proposal to decrease the protection under CITES for this species of goose. So I think this just gives you an example to show you that it can be done. It can be done. We need to replicate it on a much bigger scale, but we can turn the corner on species conservation, and this is a good example of that. Now, turning away from the proposals to amend the appendices, we've got a large suite of activities in CITES to address the conservation management and the science involved in a wide variety of species. I haven't got time to mention them all today. The Secretary General told you how many documents we've got, and they cover West African vultures, amphibians, eels, which are used in the fishing industry, agar-wood producing species, boswellia trees, that's frankincense, trade in that. There's a big program we have on that. Marine turtles, sharks and rays. We have a big program for the conservation of sharks and rays. Seahorses, African lions, songbirds, tiger antelope, queen conch, marine ornamental fishes, African trees, neotropical trees, medicinal and aromatic plants. I could go on and on. I think this just shows you the level of interest that there is in the work of the convention. All these things are being promoted by our parties. They want to work together to improve the status of these species and to improve the implementation of the convention for them. So we've got a packed agenda on the science front, and I think this is a healthy sign. We're struggling a little bit to keep up, both ourselves and the parties, as the Secretary General was saying, but there's a need and there's an interest to take action to improve the conservation status of all these species, which are not only intrinsically valuable for mankind, but also of commercial value and livelihood value to many species many people around the world. So a lot on the agenda. I wanted just to finish by, for once, we have a species which we've never talked about, an issue which we've never talked about at a CITES meeting before, and that's wildlife trade and zoonotic diseases. Now, of course, the COVID pandemic has brought all this into sharper focus. We've all read the newspaper reports saying that pangolins were responsible for spreading COVID and all that sort of thing. The jury is out on all that. We don't know a great deal about how the virus is spread between wild animals and humans. What's suspected is that bats are the primary host. There may be a secondary host before it gets to humans, but of course the contact between humans and wild animals is particularly close in wildlife trade, and therefore it's right that we look at the role that wildlife trade might be playing in the spread of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the virus which caused the COVID pandemic. And it's this transmission and spillover between wild animals and people which is the focus of the activity. So the question comes, what is the role for CITES in helping to reduce the risk from future zoonotic disease emergence associated with international wildlife trade? And make no mistake, we've seen one virus which has spread to humans from wild animals, and there are more lurking out there in a reservoir in bats in particular. And so we need to be ready to address these consequences in future. But what could CITES do? As we know, there's a lot of activity gone on in many fora, a lot of it here in Geneva with the World Health Organization, with OIE, the Organization for Animal Health based in Paris. Many organizations are working on this issue. We don't want to spend CITES time if we can't make a difference. So there's a reflection going on as to what role CITES can or should play in this issue. And we have two approaches being proposed. One approach is a more stepwise approach, a sort of review of the state of things, a look at our relationships with other organizations to see how they can be strengthened, and then a proposal in 2025 for more concrete action. But on the other hand, a group of parties, particularly from West Africa, are seeking more immediate action. They want parties to set up national CITES One Health panels, programs and plans, and they want a body organized by the CITES Secretariat to advise the countries on what sort of things they should be doing. So two different speeds being proposed, action now or a more stepwise approach. But this should be, I think, an interesting debate at the conference, and it's right that CITES looks at its role, the role of wildlife trade in the spread of zoonotic diseases. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that's all I've got time for this morning. So I hope that's given you a little flavor of the work of the Convention on Science Issues. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David, for that great overview and entertaining overview as well. I really appreciate that you used the image of the sea cucumber to highlight the animal species some animal species that are being proposed to list or upgrade or downlist on the appendices, because it brings to the fore that it's not only about cute and cuddly animals that CITES is dealing with, and that these are very important creatures all around, and also for timber species, that the economic impacts of losing very precious wood, for example, that would be caused by losing them to the countries is an important point to make. And that's why I think more and more timber species, more and more marine species, because they also have huge economic value, are being proposed to be listed. And I think finally on the goose, it's good to give the message that for CITES, a success is actually being able to either put it on a lower, from Appendix 1 to Appendix 2 to downlist the species, or take it off the appendices altogether. This is really the sign of success of CITES. So we look forward to more of those when populations increase, that they can be removed from some of the appendices. Now we move, again, thanks, David, for that, and to your team for all the hard work. Now we move to enforcement issues on combating illegal wildlife trade. Again, my congratulations to Ben and his team for very hard work. We're a very small secretariat. We have very small teams in this unit dealing with enforcement issues, with all the increases in illegal wildlife trade, working with other partners under the consortium that we have with Interpol, the World Bank, UNODC, and I think that this goes to show how important the work of CITES is overall, because we are engaging other partners also in the fight against illegal wildlife trade. So Ben, after all the hard work of all the documents and decisions that you've had to prepare with your team, will you please give us a little bit of information about that? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Secretary General, also for those kind words. And good morning also from my side, ladies and gentlemen. And it's my pleasure to brief you on the enforcement-related matters. Now, as you've heard already this morning, a few references to illegal trade in wildlife. Wildlife crime and illegal trade in wildlife remains a global issue, poses a big global challenge, and therefore it's just natural that there will be a number of documents also discussed at COP that deals with enforcement issues and illegal trade in wildlife. And the first document I would like to look at this morning is the document on enforcement matters. Now, this document, amongst others, highlights the need to scale up efforts to address illicit financial flows from wildlife crime, but it also looks at the essentiality that parties must ensure that they have risk mitigation policies and strategies in place, because corruption also in many cases continues to pose a challenge. The reporting provided also touches on a number of other matters. It, for example, highlights the different enforcement-related web pages that are available on the CITES Secretariat website, and are listed there on the slide. As you can see, valuable tools and information available on these web pages for our parties, and we encourage that parties use them. The document also highlights the need to use forensic applications to the fullest extent possible to combat wildlife crime. And there's also information on the updating of the directory of laboratories that conduct wildlife forensic testing provided in the document. In terms of recommendations that will be considered at COP, amendments to Resolution COP 17.6 on prohibiting, preventing, detecting and countering corruption are proposed, and there are also draft decisions that aims at strengthening responses to address corruption and illicit financial flows from wildlife crime. The next document is the document on annual illegal trade reports. Now, this document provides information on the activities conducted regarding annual illegal trade reports that were submitted by parties and regarding the implementation of decisions on this issue. Now, Decision 18.75 directed the Secretariat to contract UNODC to establish, host and maintain a database for the storage and management of CITES illegal trade data. The Secretariat is pleased to report that this database has been established and that up to June 2022, over 100,000 seizure records have been recorded in the CITES illegal trade database. The Secretariat further reports that a data dissemination platform is being finalized that will enable our parties and our IQUIC partner organizations to directly access this data. The Secretariat also worked with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime to prepare a report for COP19, which provides an assessment of the annual illegal trade reports and the data submitted by parties for the 2060 to 2020 period. An executive summary of this report is available in Annex 3 to the document, and the full report is also available through a link that are provided in the document. Now, the CITES illegal trade database is currently maintained through external funding, and a cost estimate for the maintaining of the database during the next intersessional period is presented in Annex 4 to the document. Now, this data really, ladies and gentlemen, represents a powerful tool to be drawn upon by our parties, and access to the data will help inform research, analysis, the decision-making of parties, and facilitate the development of appropriate law enforcement responses to wildlife crime. In terms of recommendations that will be considered, there are amendments proposed to Resolution CONF 11.17 on national reports, and this amendments aim to promote the standardization of seizure data reporting and also to facilitate the use of the standard reporting template that exists. There are also draft decisions proposed to address existing data gaps, improve overall submission rates, and improve the quality of data. Then we move on to wildlife crime enforcement support in West and Central Africa. Now, 2 documents were submitted for discussion under this agenda item. Document 36.1 submitted by the Standing Committee and 36.2 submitted by a group of our parties, as you can see there on the slide. Now, first of all, document 36.1 highlights a broad range of activities that have been undertaken or are ongoing in West and Central Africa since COP18, as well as the support available to parties in the 2 sub-regions. It also highlights that both sub-regions continues to be significantly affected by wildlife crime and that further action is needed. Document 36.2 provides information on measures and activities undertaken by parties in West Africa that contributed and supported the implementation of the decisions adopted at COP18. The document also reiterates the concern about ongoing wildlife crime in the sub-region. The Secretariat in its comments on these 2 documents in order to streamline the proposed draft decisions and to leverage on existing processes and cooperation mechanisms, proposed a new set of draft decisions that basically consolidates what is proposed in these two documents for consideration at COP19. Then we move on to, let me just see, I think, yeah, I missed a slide there. Then we move on to the Task Force on Illegal Trade in Specimens of CITES listed tree species. Now, Decision 1879 directed the Secretariat to convene a task force on illegal trade in specimens of CITES listed tree species and to report to the Standing Committee on the work of this task force. Now, the task force was convened online in February 2022, and the Standing Committee at its 74th meeting reviewed the report of the Secretariat and made recommendations as required. The present document prepared for COP19 provides reporting on the work conducted and the recommendations agreed by the Standing Committee. Now, ladies and gentlemen, illegal trade in CITES listed tree species continue to be a matter of great concern, and the task force meeting outcomes provide a strong basis for parties to take action to address this illegal trade. So the Secretariat, in its comments on the document, recommends that the COP adopt the recommendations proposed by the Standing Committee, as well as draft decisions that are proposed by the Secretariat. Then we move on to the document on Totoaba. Again, for this agenda item, two documents were submitted. Document 29.2.1 prepared by the Secretariat and 29.2.2 submitted by the United States of America. Now, a large part of the document prepared by the Secretariat focus on the implementation of Decision 18293 by Mexico and the mission that the Secretariat conducted to Mexico from 30 May to 6 June 2022. And this mission found that although Mexico is making good progress on some fronts, several matters of concern also exist, and this is elaborated upon in the document. As you know, the illegal fishing of Totoaba that poses a severe threat to the vaquita, which occurs in the Sea of Cortez. The Secretariat, in its comments on the two documents, recommend that the COP adopt the proposed revisions to decisions from COP18 on Totoaba that were made, and as proposed in document 29.2.1. And it's also not agreed to not adopt the renewed and updated decisions in document 29.2.2 because they, to a large extent, duplicate what is proposed in the other document. Moving on to Asian big cats. The document on Asian big cats contains the reporting of the Secretariat to the COP in accordance with Resolution 12.5 on conservation of and trade in tigers and other Appendix 1 Asian big cat species. Now, illegal trade in Asian big cat specimens, ladies and gentlemen, remains a concern, and SC74 requested the Secretariat to work with the Standing Committee Chair to propose to COP19 the renewal of the decisions on Asian big cats, 18100 to 18109, as well as 17226 and 1469, which still remains in effect. The Secretariat did, as the Standing Committee request, work with the Standing Committee Chair, and the decisions were revised and updated to ensure that they remain current. The Secretariat also proposed to delete decisions that have been implemented or that are redundant to the resolution, Resolution 12.5, and to replace some of the decisions with new draft decisions or amendments to Resolution Conf 12.5. And you can find the recommendations of the Secretariat in paragraph 28 of that document. Now, moving on to pangolins. Similar to big cats, illegal trade in pangolin specimens remain of concern and further action by parties is needed. Two documents on pangolins were submitted for COP19. Document 71.1 submitted by the Standing Committee in consultation with the Animals Committee Chair, and 71.2 submitted by the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, in these documents, respectively, amendments to Resolution 17.10 on conservation of and trade in pangolins are proposed, as well as new draft decisions are proposed. The Secretariat, in its comments on the two documents, recommends that the COP adopt the proposed amendments to Resolution 17.10 as presented in Annex 1 to document 71.2, subject to further amendments that were proposed by the Secretariat. The Secretariat, in its comments, notes that the draft decisions proposed in the two documents partially overlap. And to facilitate discussions at COP19, the Secretariat consolidated the draft decisions from the two documents and included proposed changes for consideration at COP. Then moving on to rhinoceroses, the document on rhinos provides information on a number of things, which includes the national and conservation status and trends for African and Asian rhinos, illegal killing of rhinos in Africa and Asia, illegal trade in rhinos, in rhino horn and enforcement efforts, poaching and trafficking challenges, and on activities to reduce demand for rhino horn. The document also includes a section on parties most affected by illegal trade in rhino horn, and these are South Africa, China, including Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Mozambique, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. In addition, the Secretariat also includes reporting on Botswana, because that party has experienced a significant decline in its rhino populations in recent years. In terms of recommendations, amendments to Resolution 9.14 on conservation of and trade in Asian and African rhinos are proposed, and also a renewal of Decision 18116, which deals with the demand reduction, and additional draft decisions are proposed. Then I move on to the document on the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime. Ladies and gentlemen, provides reporting on a broad range of activities that were conducted and tools developed under the auspices of IQIC, as it is known for short. Of course, for those of you that don't know, IQIC is a collaborative effort between the CITES Secretariat, Interpol, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the World Bank, and the World Customs Organization. And through this consortium, we work together to support parties' efforts to strengthen criminal justice systems and address wildlife crime. Now, IQIC continues to play a critical role in assisting parties globally to combat wildlife crime, using a coordinated and cohesive approach and providing parties with the tools, services, technical support, and other support needed to bring the criminals involved in wildlife crime to justice. The document also introduced the IQIC Vision 2030, which provides the roadmap for the work of the consortium over the coming years. And this vision will be formally launched on 18 November in the margins of COP19 at a high-level event. And there will also be other side events hosted by IQIC in the margins of COP19. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that was a very brief snapshot of the enforcement-related matters that will be discussed. There are also several other documents, as you can see there on the slide, related to enforcement that will be under discussion at the meeting. I hope it was informative, and I'll hand back to you, Secretary General. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ben, and to your team for all the hard work and this really good overview about what is, how is it that the parties and the Secretariat are working together to be able to address wildlife crime and developing tools that can aid the parties, because at the end of the day, it is the parties who need to address wildlife crime working together. Our wildlife management authorities with customs authorities and with the police to be able to bring these criminals to justice and to stop the illegal wildlife trade. So lots of decisions will be taken at the COP on this matter. Now we move to legal matters under Juan Carlos Vasquez and his team. Again, a wide range of issues, a small team dealing with a wide range of issues, all things, that are going to be coming up at the meeting, dealing with rules of procedure, all the advice that they have to give parties on compliance being very much a foundation of the convention, where the Secretariat reaches out to parties to help with the contributions from donors to provide capacity building, to help them be able to implement the convention effectively. So a really tall order of work that needs to be done on the part of the Secretariat by checking compliance, but also by ensuring that parties have the tools and the capacity necessary to be able to implement the convention. So thanks to you and your team, Juan Carlos, for all this hard work during this time. Here you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General. And let me remind that the Secretary General Higuero is the first woman to head this CITES Secretariat and the first person from the developing world. And thank you, all of you, for joining us. I'm pleased to see countries from Europe, Asia, and Latin America here, and all those joining online. Please stay with us. Don't go. We have a few things to share with you on legal matters, innovative projects, and the money issue, which is also very important. So let me start with some legal matters. We divide these matters in substantive matters and procedural issues, and some related to compliance. I would like to mention one important meeting that will happen before the COP, which is the 75th meeting of the Standing Committee, happening on the 13th of November. And this meeting will discuss very important issues related to compliance, mainly linked to some of the countries of the parties from different continents. So please pay attention to those documents as well. Regarding the rules of procedure, which is the key document to understand how the decision-making is happening in CITES, I would like to withdraw the attention to the credentials, Rule 5. Please bring the credentials to the meeting. Only parties whose credentials have been accepted by the Credentials Committee can cast a vote. If you don't have the credentials, you are wasting your trip to Panama for participating in the important decision-making. You will be only allowed to speak. So please keep that in mind. This is a convention that always decides. So if there is no consensus, which is the rule, and we discussed with the chairs last week to make sure that the consensus is the first option, this convention votes when the consensus cannot be found. And for that, that's why it's important to have the credentials. And we have different majorities depending on the different kind of decisions that you are adopting. For budget issues, is a 3/4 majority. For substantive issues and all the listing proposals explained by my scientific colleague, those decisions require 2/3 majority. And for procedural issues, it requires simple majority, except in 2 instances that are important for you delegates, is when you request a secret ballot, and for that you require only 10 parties, and for motions to open or reopen a debate in plenary at the end of the meeting, and that this requires 1/3 of the parties. There are 2 documents suggesting to amend the rules of procedure. The idea is that in CITES, the existing rules will apply until those rules are amended, and we expect that the parties will find a way forward to avoid spending a lot of time on the first day discussing amendments to the rules of procedure, and also avoiding voting, because the first day you're still arriving and you don't have all the credentials ready or approved by the Credentials Committee. So it's not a good day to make decisions by vote. So we would like to invite you to keep that in mind. This is how the rules. We have an interesting proposal for you. The Secretary General mentioned the 50th anniversary of CITES. I'm sure that probably many of us would like to know how much is the illegal, represents the wildlife trade. And we don't have that response. Would like just to remember remind you that CITES is a hybrid animal. It's a mix of environmental law, trade law, and customs law. So these are the rules that you are discussing during these 2 weeks. And CITES is at the intersection of trade, environment, and development. So this document is trying to fill a gap along overdue. We are expecting to have a pilot version for the COP, and we are organizing also a side event. So we invite all to have a look at this document that is an innovation that the country of South Africa is suggesting to the other parties and also suggesting some decisions to continue to have a periodic version of this report, giving us an accounting of the value of wildlife trade for the parties and the benefits to the national economies, the local communities, the indigenous people that are benefiting from that trade. Trade could be good or bad depending on how it's conducted, and this report is trying to explain technically and with data evidence the different angles of that trade. One very important aspect of CITES also is the participation of the indigenous people and local communities. This is becoming more and more salient in CITES, and we are going to discuss the modalities for the participation of these indigenous people and local communities representatives in CITES decision making. And we have also some work associated on livelihoods, good examples of programs involving local communities, indigenous people, that shows that when trade is well conducted and involve local community, it could be good for development, good for the economies, and good for conservation, which is our main business. So we are conservation centered, but we are not blind or clinical isolation from the other aspects of trade. And for that, I think it's important that we also work with partners, and we are having WTO, UNCTAD, IUCN, Sustainable Livelihoods Working Group, Traffic, and UNEP supporting that effort. On the pure substantive legal matters, we have an emblematic project, which is the National Legislation Project that assesses the legislation of all the 184 parties to verify that they comply with the minimum requirements to implement this treaty, which is not a self-executing treaty. It needs national legislation. So we have 108 parties in category 1, and congratulations to all of you. But for category 2 and 3, please contact us. We are here to provide you assistance. And we have a list. Some of you are priority countries, so check your status on this document 28 to see where you are. And also check at the decisions that we are proposing to the COP. These are quite standard decisions to facilitate the implementation of the project, which is celebrating this year its 30th anniversary. So we are organizing a nice side event on that. Thank you to all the pioneers that started this project in '92 in Kyoto. Regarding compliance matters, we have 2 documents. We do 2 things. We assess, monitor compliance, and we assist countries to comply. So the first one is to assess and monitor compliance. We are explaining what we are doing, the ongoing cases, and one specific one, which is an expedited procedure for a timber in West Africa that involved 16 countries, and is a quite innovative approach. So we are bringing this to the attention of the parties to gather their comments on how to refine this process and how they are complying with the recommendations adopted by the Standing Committee. The other side of the assessment and monitoring is assisting countries with compliance, and we are working together with several units. It's a multidisciplinary program involving the scientists, the enforcement colleagues, and very heavily the capacity building, outreach, and projects unit of the CITES Secretariat. We have also a pilot with 4 countries. We started with Guinea, and we are realizing that assisting countries from far distance is not very easy. Sometimes you need to be closer to the parties, and we are recommending to consider moving from national approaches to regional ones, or sub-regional at least, to be more efficient in the provision of this assistance. The two pillars of the sustainability pillar is done via something that we call the non-detriment findings, which is a scientific finding, and the legality is done under the legal acquisition findings, the proof of the origin, the legal origin of the specimens that are in trade. So we are bringing a revised guidance, a rapid guide to verify legality for CITES transactions, and we thank the UK government for hosting a workshop last September in Oxford to discuss this guide and bring to the consideration of the parties and a revised version of this guide. Also, thank you to all the NGOs and the different actors that are involved in that work. This is what we call the LAF, which is the second pillar of CITES, the legality assessment to verify the legal origin of the specimens in trade. Something that is related to what we mentioned before of the listing of marine species, we have more and more in CITES, is we are going into the sea, and we have something that we call introduction from the sea, which is trade between resources that are found or species found in international waters, areas beyond national jurisdiction, and port states and flag states for the vessels. So we are refining that regulation. We have a very poor implementation of the resolution 14.6, which is the one regulating introduction from the sea. So we don't have a lot of records of vessels fishing in areas beyond national jurisdiction that are requesting CITES documents. So we are working on that, and we are also linking this project to some compliance issues in the future involving parties that are very active in fishing CITES listed marine species but are not implementing the convention. Something that we like to highlight is that in CITES, by catch as a legal category doesn't matter, doesn't exist as such. It's trade for us. So you need, if you are fishing by accident or fishing in a direct fisheries, you need to have CITES documents. Next is a small document that I think that you need to pay a lot of attention because it's a tiny one, but which a huge decision proposed with very practical implications for all of you, which is the definition that we have for parts and derivatives in resolution 9.6. And what the working group that was created by the standing committee is suggesting is to consider that all these specimens that are produced in a lab through biotechnology that contain CITES specimens, CITES ingredients, if I can express the idea in that manner, are CITES specimens and should be regulated so that trade in specimens produced in a lab through biotechnology that contain CITES elements are CITES specimens. So this is a very important change in the regulation of that trade. We are not the only ones discussing this matter. CBD is also dealing with this issue, and the WHO, WTO, the Biological Weapons Convention, we are talking to all of them, but this is the future. We are moving from the wild to the farm to the lab. So we are adjusting. CITES is a convention that evolves and always adjusts to the new developments in a quite agile manner. So please pay attention to that document. Now on the socioeconomic aspects, we are also trying to think beyond, a bit outside the box to think how we are more efficient in combating illegal trade. And we have these three pillar strategy with enforcement, classic enforcement, livelihoods, and demand reduction. So we are developing a guidance for parties that would like to adopt demand reduction strategies, focus on evidence-based for targeted species, and also trying to focus on behavior change. It's not mainly raising awareness, it's changing the behavior of a segment of the population that is affecting the survival of the species in a very negative way. So designing the strategies to nudge this these communities to change their behavior. And this is quite complementary to the work explained by my colleague, Ben van Rensburg. There will be an iconic species for this COP, is the jaguar. Jaguar is a species, the big cat of the Americas, present in 18 countries. There are more or less 160,000 jaguars around. The main population is in Brazil. And talking about jaguars, I would like to mention one expert that was with us during all this process, that is Howard Quigley, that just passed away a few weeks ago. Thank you to Panthera and all his family, our condolences for this huge loss for the jaguar conservation community. And we have 2 documents discussing how to progress this agenda item. So this will be one of the most iconic species for the COP in Panama. Finally, this is a very technical legal document that will be important for discussions happening around other proposals in Committee 1, which is document 88, discussing if parties can enter reservation when there are amendments to annotations. So this is quite technical jargon for you, but sometimes we have, like in the insurance contracts, you have the contract and you have a small letter there saying this only applies to this and that. And so the big discussion is on the annotations, and there is a document referring to 3 aspects of the problem. First, the idea of mentioning resolutions and decisions in annotations, which is the annotations, just for you to know, the appendices and the annotations are part of the legally binding part of the treaty. The text of the convention with the appendices is legally binding. So very technical discussion, but happy to respond if you have any question on this one. And I think this discussion will happen in Committee 2, but will have an impact on several documents referring to trade in live animals, on listing or delist or transferring species from an appendix to another, your rights to express consent or not on the changes, so entering reservations. All this is discussed in this document that will result if the parties, and we invite the parties to have a highly technical debate on this. This is very technical and is related to the fundamental principles of this treaty, will result in amending resolutions 1121 on annotations, 4.6 on making proposals, and 4.25 on making reservations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos, for that overview of a range of subjects that will be dealt with under legal aspects and for compliance. And thank you for also raising the World Wildlife Trade Report, a new product that we think will have a good impact on raising awareness of the value of the legal wildlife trade to encourage more investment and why it's important for the conservation, for others to invest in conservation, particularly the industry and business who also profit from the wildlife trade. Thanks for that, and congratulations on all the hard work. Now, last but not least, Sophie Flensburg will be speaking about capacity building, access to funding, and the high-level event that will be happening in Panama. Again, a small team covering a wide range of subjects, very different and during a difficult time. Thanks, Sophie, for your leadership on that and appreciating all the hard work from your team, especially during these difficult times of changes and new subjects being raised under this unit. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General. I have 6 topics to cover. These are mostly strategic and forward-looking and not as technical as some of the previous items that my colleagues have presented. The first item is capacity building, is item 16 on the agenda of the Conference of the Parties. And this is a very important topic for most countries, and I'd like to use the French word renforcement des capacités, because that's really what it is. It's not building capacity, it's strengthening the capacity, because there is already quite a lot of capacity out there. The document at the COP will report on the decisions that were made at the previous COP, 39 to 46, which were sort of threefold. Invited the Secretariat and parties to strengthen capacity building where needed, invited the Standing Committee to develop an integrated capacity building framework that would help assess the needs and provide a more coordinated capacity building where those needs were identified, and invited the Standing Committee to review Resolution 3.4 on technical assistance and consider whether a revision was needed. I note that that resolution was adopted in 1981 and has not been amended since then. So it was about time that somebody looked at the resolution to see whether some updating was required. So the Standing Committee is proposing a new resolution on capacity building for adoption at this coming conference, and also proposing that a continued discussion on this integrated capacity building framework will take place, because due to COVID, this discussion was not completed in the previous period, and there seems to be still some appetite to continue that work. So those are the two main decisions to be made by the conference under this item. Moving now to access to funding, which is not completely delinked from capacity building. Obviously, there is a need for funding to both build capacity, but also to more broadly engage in conservation activities. And item 7.5, which is talking to this issue, is firstly linking the CITES implementation with the Global Environment Fund and its new Wildlife Conservation for Development integrated program, where there is some new opportunities to seek financing for CITES implementation that we would encourage all parties to explore with their national GEF focal point, their Global Environment Fund focal point. In this document, we will also be referring to some work that has been undertaken by the Secretariat in very recent past, just over the summer, and we're concluding it now, which is a study on exploring sustainable financing for wildlife conservation. So we've undertaken a study, and this study is now available in a draft that will be discussed at a roundtable next week in Nairobi. And we will be reporting on this to the Conference of the Parties, because there are some linkages to some of the other documents. In the two other proposals that I've just briefly mentioned, one of them was already mentioned by Thea, 66.2.2, which proposes a trust fund accessible to elephant range states, not only African, but to elephant range states upon destruction of government-held ivory stockpiles. And the other proposal was mentioned by Ben, 36.2, which is inter alia suggesting the establishment of a trust fund for enforcement, in particular for Western Central Africa. So there are some links here with access to funding in other documents, and the Secretariat is proposing some decisions addressed to the Standing Committee to further explore sustainable funding sources. And then my colleague Juan Carlos Vasquez mentioned that our Secretary General is the first woman to head this Secretariat, so it's very appropriate that we have an agenda item on CITES and gender, which is, I think, the first time that we are addressing this so explicitly. The document proposes a new resolution on gender and wildlife, as well as some decisions that will encourage the establishment of gender action plans at the national level. And so these are decisions to address to the Standing Committee to work on a gender action plan and perhaps encourage national action plans on this issue. So these were the first three issues. Moving on, the CITES Tree Species Program is another strategic issue for the Secretariat, and is very much linked to the item on CITES and forests, which these two are item 19 and item 20. under the CITES tree species program, we will be discussing and reporting on the results of the CITES tree species program and the projects that have been carried out, the 20 projects that have been carried out over the period of this project. This has been funded by the European Union, and about 20 projects have been implemented, producing a total of 80 technical reports that are all available on the CITES tree species program website. We will also be reporting on lessons learned that were brought up at a closing workshop we had last week or the week before last in Malaysia. The document itself and the decisions contained in the document will propose a new phase of, or a new similar program for capacity building, because there is a continued need for support to strengthen the implementation of the convention in relation to trees and to protect forests. And the new program could focus around be structured around 3 pillars: on governance and regulation of trade, on sustainability of trade in tree species, and on identification and traceability and marking. And cross-cutting themes would be capacity building and engagement of rural communities. So we're looking to see if we can generate sufficient demand and support for continuing this work, because there is a very strong momentum and a very sort of strong call for continuing the work. So that's the item 20 and item 19. I should just mention briefly, as my colleagues have done, that we will have a side event on this CITES and forest that will take place in the evening of the 15th of November. So on the second day of the COP in the evening, we'll present more in detail on these issues on CITES and forests. Moving on, United Nations World Wildlife Day, just very briefly, we will report on the implementation of and the celebration of the World Wildlife Day under item 18. And I just wanted to mention here that World Wildlife Day 2023 will be extra significant, because we will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the convention. And we will be doing that hopefully in the place where the convention was signed. And under the theme, partnerships for wildlife conservation, we think that's appropriate because, as you have heard, partnerships is a very important aspect of our convention, because we're working with a number of international organizations and the parties in particular to actually make sure that the convention is implemented. Moving on to my last slide, electronic systems and information technologies, item 41. I just, again, this is a strategic forward-looking item. I'll be very brief, just mentioning that we call it e-CITES. It's basically electronic CITES permitting systems. They contribute to legality, sustainability, and traceability. And the permitting system, as mentioned by the Secretary General in her overview, the permitting system is the key mechanism for ensuring that trade is legal, sustainable, and traceable. And we find that using electronic permitted systems makes it much more reliable and impermittable, meaning that there are less risks of irregularity. The document proposes amendments to 2 of the resolutions and proposes 2 sets of new decisions. Some of the work is ongoing, and there is also some new work proposed in these 2 resolutions and decisions. The Standing Committee is suggesting that the Conference of the Parties encourage parties to ensure greater coordination and cooperation between management authorities and customs. It was also mentioned by Juan Carlos previously. Encourage parties to implement electronic CITES permitting systems and to exchange and to implement systems to exchange information, permit information electronically. And the Secretariat has developed quite a lot of different material to guide that process. It also encourages parties to establish risk profiles specific to CITES listed specimens that are frequently traded to be able to better intercept illegally traded shipments. And finally, the documents encourage greater cooperation with the World Customs Organization for joint activities related to these risk assessment and risk-based control procedures, as well as other agencies, including United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and United Nations Center for Trade Facilitation and Electronic Business, that are all working in this area and have very useful products and processes. And we have been working very closely with the UNCTAD Asecuda program to facilitate the implementation of eCITES. I think I will leave it at that. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General.
Thank you very much for that overview. And although you may say that it's not technical, perhaps maybe a good word is saying that it's practical, that these are practical matters that really assist the parties in implementing the convention effectively. And in particular with the eCITES permitting system, I've said since I've started that we need to move into the 21st century and use more these tools that we have, which I think will make the trade much more traceable. And we know, as we have heard, with corruption and all the rest of it that comes along with illegal wildlife trade, these types of systems, I think, would really make a difference in that sense as well. So thank you so much on that. And again, congratulations to you and your team for all the hard work. Just 1 second, perhaps I can ask Haruko, because you have been working, Haruko Kuso, my colleague, who is working with the Panamanian government on the high-level segment, maybe 2 words on that so the parties are aware of what's been happening. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much. We thought that you may be interested in learning a little bit about the host country, Panama's interest in holding a high-level ministerial event on 13th of November 2022, the day before the COP. The high-level segment will be under the theme of sustainable financing for wildlife conservation and is aimed to focus on discussing the need for conservation-related financing options that are cost-effective, reliable, and replicable in the different financing systems in different regions around the world. The event is being organized by the Ministry of Environment of Panama in cooperation with the United Nations Development Program and in consultation with the CITES Secretariat. At the moment, from what we have understood, the invitation letters have gone out to high-level speakers as well as the ministers of the selected countries, including the members of the standing committee, and that there has been some positive responses received, but the Panamanian government is still waiting for the confirmation from further high-level speakers. So if you are a representative of a standing committee member, permanent mission, it would be great if you might be able to also consult and see if the response has been sent back to the Panamanian invitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Haruko, for that. And yes, it would be great if they could get some responses soon to finalize the event, the preparations for the event. And importantly, the subject of this event is very much something that we are working on and mentioned by Sophie on access to funding, this roundtable of financing, because we are aware, and I always say, the conservation costs are local, but the benefits are global to wildlife conservation. We have to find ways in which the parties who are managing these resources are able to have a steady stream of income to make sure that they can pay for the cost of conserving these wild species in situ. And this is not a cheap matter. It's very expensive to be able to maintain habitats and fight poaching, to have rangers, to make sure that there's enough, there's work also with human wildlife conflict. So there are a number of things that need to be paid for by these governments, by these parties who have these wildlife resources. And I think it's a global obligation to help them. And so that this work that we are doing with access to funding, with sustainable financing, we hope has promises for finding ways in which we can have also private investors looking beyond government funds, but also with private investors to invest in these possible innovative mechanisms. So thanks for that. Very quickly, I know I promised something about the budget, so I just want to mention very quickly with one slide to make sure that there's a few minutes for questions if there are any, that as usual, and many of you already know this, that we usually have 3 budget proposals for the intersessional period, and in this case, 2023 to 2025. So we have the one budget proposal, which is on zero real growth scenario, which is a 12.8% increase. And now that looks like a whopping increase. And let me just explain that we have been asked and told basically by the administration, which is the UN Secretariat, UNEP, United Nations Environment Program under the UN Secretariat, that we need to use UN standard salary costs and not the real costs depending on each organization, each staff member that we have, but that use for every single staff member, what are the UN standard salary costs. And we have not been doing that in the past, but we have been mandated to do it. It was presented at the standing committee. So this has caused the majority of the increase in all of these scenarios. So 12.8, I am not asking, we are not asking even in the incremental growth scenario, which is the last scenario on this slide, for any increase in staff, even though we desperately could use extra staff, but we understand the situation that we are under after going through the pandemic and difficulties now at the global level with financing, that we know that this is not a good time to be asking for extra staff. So the only increases under the zero real growth were the actual expenditures that we had under 2022 period, plus using the UN standard salary costs. For the zero nominal growth scenario, we are just using the approved budget that we had for 2020, 2022, plus the use of the UN standard salary costs as we were mandated. So that was a 10.4% increase. And then the incremental growth scenario, which is known as the Secretary General's proposal, is still building on the zero real growth scenario, using the UN standard salary costs, no new staff positions, but some changes which have to do that we have noticed that there have been an increase in cost related to the maintenance and development of the CITES website, which we find a very important tool that all parties used, and maintenance actually has high cost, and we needed to add something to the budget on that. Plus, propose increases in communication and outreach activities, which we have already also noticed that has been of paramount importance during this time of the pandemic, to be able to stay in contact with parties, but also with the outside world on what CITES is doing. So those are the changes in terms of the Secretary General's or incremental growth scenario. So any questions that you may have, please feel free to ask about that. But this is all these budget proposals are online and available through our documents website. So thank you so much to my team. Now we turn it over to you. If you have any additional questions, I don't know if there was anything online still that we know, if there was anything. And here in the room, if there are any questions, please feel free. If we have left something out. No questions online. I think we were very thorough in our explanation. I know, and again, my congratulations to the parties, because I think the hard work is in your hands to prepare for the meeting and to be able to have these discussions in 2 weeks and to try to achieve consensus firstly, and then to make the decisions that are best for our wildlife. So thank you so much for all your hard work, and we look forward. We thank the government of Panama again for hosting the meeting, for their kind hospitality and generosity in hosting the meeting. And we are looking forward to welcoming you to Panama in just a few weeks. We're all nervous about that. Thank you so much. Are we still connected? My final words, I forgot, and this is the most important thing, that my colleague Diana Rizzolio is not with us today here in the office. So she asked me to please ensure that I thanked the government of Switzerland and the Geneva Environment Network for their support and allowing us to have this important meeting and communicate with the mission. So thanks to Jen, Deanna, and her team for all the help that you've done to make sure that we could have a successful meeting, and to the government of Switzerland for their support to the Geneva Environment Network. Thank you very much.